Hello, everyone, and welcome to Economics Unplugged with Prof. This podcast is an insightful conversation with economists and professors, where we deep dive into the Indian economy. So, today our guest is Dr. Megha Patnaik, a professor of economics at Lewis University in Rome, and also a research affiliate at Center for Economic Policy Research. She received her PhD in economics from Stanford University. She was also a visiting professor at Indian Statistical Institute. She has a deep understanding of management practices and machine learning. Dr. Megha is also a co founder of Leap Insights and a part of the network of women in data science and social science. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining me today. Uh, today we'll discuss about the world of management practices and their critical role in driving economic growth. Professor Megha is currently doing a research on this topic, and she will tell how effective management strategies not only enhance organizational performance, but also contribute significantly to the overall economic development of a country. So we'll come to the very basic question is that what exactly are management practices?
Okay, so thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm very happy you have this initiative. So management practices specifically, they are not looking at managers or management, as you might think that one particular manager is driving a company or something. But what we're trying to get at is that are there some things that you can do inside the firm, anywhere in the world or in different sectors, in different environments, which essentially enhance productivity? So these are practices which can be focused on hiring, firing, promotions based on performance rather than tenure. They can be, how you track targets, how you meet the targets, whether your targets are short-term, long-term. You can have quality control. You can have key performance indicators that you're tracking and find out who knows about them and who doesn't. So those essentially are your management practices. These are effectively in 3 dimensions: targets, monitoring, and incentives, like I described. And these are very well known to work in different settings to help with firm productivity.
Can we say these management practices an extension of Kaizen and the lean manufacturing that has been discovered well before?
Exactly. So essentially, these began with Japanese aero and auto manufacturing. So if you think of Toyota, for example, they had these practices in place, and these were hugely improving for auto plant productivity. And then it was found that not only in auto plants, but in other manufacturing establishments, you also find that these kind of practices help with efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, I remember this. There is a Toyota case study also in 2000, which, with the help of these manufacturing, techniques, they improved their entire industry over a period of time. So, coming back to this, since you're doing a research on this topic, so what exactly the focus of your research?
So, we are essentially looking at what are these practices, how much are they adopted in different settings? What are the barriers in adopting them? And what is the implication on firm performance that they have? And these we've studied in a variety of different settings. So for example, right now we're looking at evidence from 14 different countries on management practices. These are countries ranging from Pakistan, Russia, Denmark, the US, Mexico, Italy, and so on. And so for all these countries, what we find some common trends in how management relates to firm productivity, profitability, firm size. And so that's one aspect of the research, which is that what are the implications and what are the trends that we see across countries. The other things that we've looked at is how what are the implications on new dimensions. So for example, for Italy, in the work I've done with the Bank of Italy, we found that better managed firms were more resilient to the COVID shock. So essentially when COVID lockdown happened, then these firms ended up changing their supply chains, they ended up switching to remote work, they ended up changing their prices, their financing. So they did everything they could to be responsive to the shock. And then because of this, their sales growth did not decline as much compared to firms who had less of these practices in place and who weren't monitoring the production process, tracking targets, and so on. In India, in a different setting, we are finding that these practices matter for innovation. So not only patenting R&D, but also innovation as measured in the product space. So when you improve your existing products or when you introduce new products and so on.
So,
So those are some aspects we're looking at.
so you're also doing a research in India, right? Like the firms from India.
Yes.
Yeah. So the things that you discuss, is it only related to manufacturing sector, or it also applies to service sector in the same magnitude, or there will be some difference when it comes to servicing sector?
So for India, we're only looking at manufacturing. But for example, there has been work done by others, specifically John Van Reenen, Nick Bloom, Daniela Skur, and Renata Lemos. They've looked at the public sector, especially schools and hospitals. And you can find that essentially you can capture through survey measures what extent standard practices like these practices are in place in retail or in services or in public or in schools or hospitals. For this, you obviously need to change the instrument a little bit. So every time you develop a new survey for manufacturing, even for manufacturing, so we developed the survey first in the US, but if you take it to Italy or you take it to India, you have to do something which we call cognitive testing. Do you know what is cognitive testing?
No, if you could explain cognitive
Okay.
based
So
on the
basically,
mindset of what people are there. Is it something related to that? Like what kind
so
of people are
essentially, it
the
is testing the survey instrument. So if I was to ask you questions, uh, it has to be that you answer them in a way in which it makes sense to you. So you have to understand the questions. If we need to do any translation, we'll do a translation. And if there are any adjustments that need to be made, that needs to be made. So for example, for Italy, we had a question which says, what happens when you find a defect in the production process? When
production?
you find a quality defect, what do you do? And the options were you do nothing, you fix it and make sure it doesn't happen again. You fix it, make sure it doesn't happen again, put in place a continuous improvement process. And what we found in the cognitive testing was that firms wanted this option, which was that we never had a problem in the production process.
Okay.
Okay, so we put
Yeah.
that option there.
Yeah.
For India, there's a simpler example, which is that normally we say with what frequency do you review your targets?
Targets.
And it's daily, weekly, monthly, annual, and quarterly. So for some reason, Indian firms wanted to have the option of saying twice a year. So
Oh,
they did mid-year reviews. Basically, they do an end-of-year review and they do a mid-year review. So we
material.
added that option. So essentially, whenever you take a survey to a new setting, you have to a new country or to a new sector, you have to prepare your questions and then you have to test them out with a small group of
Yeah,
participants.
farms. Yeah.
Yeah, who are similar to the ones that you will be surveying, and then you exclude them, of course. So if you want to study schools and hospitals and you want to study management, then first you will prepare your questionnaire, then you try it out, then you see how does it go, then you see whether it captures the full range of,
Questionnaire
worst
works.
to
Yeah.
best managed.
Yeah.
So all of that comes under cognitive testing, which is basically the procedure by which we develop the survey.
So in your current paper, are you also targeting? Okay, so as you mentioned, it's only manufacturing sector, so the schools
Yes.
and private sectors. So as you mentioned that Nick Bloom and other professors have done.
Mm.
So if you can shed light little bit on that, what was the result in terms of Indian context about the schools and government organizations?
So we cannot extrapolate. So their study was in UK and Brazil, from what I
Okay.
remember, and we would have to do it in India because for manufacturing, basically we've done it across the board. But now essentially, you can imagine what it looks like in UK is maybe not what it looks like in India,
Yeah,
right?
it's entirely different.
But it could be, for example, that now Renata has a study in Greece and so on. So you need to look at, how changing the context uh, will basically change this. And I think they might have a project on India, which we can reference in the video. I think they have a project on schools in India, Daniela and Renata with Karthik Mullidharan.
Awesome.
So we can reference that. So, but broadly, they find the same trends that essentially you want to be having standard practices in a sector which leads to better performance within the sector, right? So it's not that within hospitals, some hospitals perform better if they do some things versus others. So there's a standard set of practices that can be shown to correlate with better outcomes, both in terms of, your outcomes in terms of attendance and so on, but also in terms of learning outcomes, right? So that's what you would want.
I mean, it's great. It's happening at least. So, before coming to your working paper, I would like to know, like, how supportive the Indian firms are while you guys are doing the research or survey.
Yeah,
Because that's very important. Because I have seen, like, there are some research happening in Bihar, where they are tracking the police officers, like how women police officers are been taken care of,
yeah,
and how they are, like, many research happens. So it really important, like how they're responding, their attendance, are they
yeah,
interested or also not in telling the information, because it's quite
yeah.
hectic for them. So what do you like, how do you find from your experience how supportive they are?
So we actually find a wide range that some firms are very supportive. So business owners love to talk about their business. So
Yes,
you
yes.
talk to somebody, that's their whole life, right? So that's what they're doing on a daily basis all day long. So if you ask them about their business, they can talk to you for hours. So because I've been working on surveys for a very long time now, uh, I automatically start serving everybody.
Yeah.
If you go to a shop and you start talking to somebody, who's usually with small businesses, they're the owner. You start talking to them, they will tell you all about their business.
Everything. It's already
Everything.
surveyed. Yeah.
They will tell
Yeah.
you everything. They will
Everything.
tell you about what happened in COVID. They will talk
Mm.
about what happened in demonetization. They will talk about, what's happening now. They will talk about their customers, their products, their employees, their father, their son. They will talk about everything.
Yeah.
Okay. So in general, business owners love to talk about their businesses. But of course, when you're doing a large scale survey, you have to do it efficiently. So you can't go and, be talking to them
Yeah.
for like 45 minutes in person. So in terms of cost efficiency, we do phone-based surveys. And these have been going pretty well. Of course, some of the questions are such that, if they're finance related, then firms are not comfortable answering them. And of course, it also depends on the quality of the enumerator. Like, how do they manage if a person is not responsive? So if I say that, I don't really feel comfortable talking about my financial performance, especially since we did the survey after COVID when firms had underperformed. So they don't want to talk about bad performance.
Yeah.
So what happens then is that you say, okay, don't worry, we don't have to talk about that right now. Let's move on to the next question. And you finish the survey and then you try to go back to it and so on. So to actually overcome, some of these issues, what we did was we basically said we want to take a sampling frame where we have the other variables of the firm from, for example, from MCA, so Ministry of
Ministry
Corporate
of
Affairs.
Corporate Affairs. Yeah.
Exactly. So you're supposed to basically file, if you're registered as a company, you're supposed to file your accounts regularly.
Accounts.
Or, for example, these will be available in CMI Prowess. When firms publish annual reports, that data gets collected, scraped,
Collected.
entered, and you'll find that in Prowess. And so what we did was we actually used that as our sampling frame. So we said only for firms for which we have additional financial data on sales and stuff, which firms are not comfortable talking about, those are the ones who we will get the qualitative information from.
Yes.
So if you think of like what is the purpose of a survey, any survey, you want to capture information which cannot be captured in other places,
Uh, Not
right?
standardized in some places that we can directly take the data. That's the purpose of survey, right? We
The whole
can't
purpose of
share
a
that.
survey is that you want to ask things which are not standardized. So this
Mm.
causes two problems. First is that I mean, essentially there's a positive and a negative. The positive is that you get the information that you would not get otherwise. But the
Otherwise.
second is it's very noisy and firms don't collect that information. So for example, in the India survey, we have a question which is how many unique products do you produce? So this is like a SKU. So basically, if you have a car which is in four different colors, then these are four different products. Okay, so you
Products.
have to count each of them. And essentially, this might be something a firm tracks, or this might be something a firm doesn't track. And so it's very difficult. Or if we ask the question, what a percentage of your sales came from your top 3 products. Now, if somebody is tracking that, they can tell you immediately. But if somebody is not tracking that,
Tracking the,
whatever number they give is a guess.
it's
So
a guess. Yeah.
yeah, so but then this is the point of the survey. So, asking questions like, where do your customers come from? So what is the geographical span of your firm? Is a hard question because, this is not something that firms have the same way that they'll have their sales data, their profit, their turnover. So they won't collect that. So this is the trade-off. But then if you're asking all your questions about sales, it's not
So,
very valuable to do a survey.
but yeah, but I'll ask the same question. Like, does it become your result become bias in that? Like, because I mean, I know like putting the your document in MCA when you are registered at a company, but most of these small firms are not registered. So
Yeah.
how like you gonna like compensate these data for the people who are not giving the data?
So I actually am very interested in large firms. So strangely enough, in America, I studied the small firms, and now in India,
Yeah.
I'm studying the large firms.
Okay. So
But basically, the small firms are they contribute a lot in terms of employment, but they don't contribute a lot in terms of output.
output,
So the
correct.
firms that we are focusing on in this study is actually the large, 10% of them are listed in our sample. So we're looking at large, formal sector firms. We're not studying the small firms because also when you have a 3% firm, management doesn't make sense. Tracking KPIs does not make sense.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
it has to be a context where it's meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but result will be almost same. I mean, it's like little bit of extrapolating to the smaller
It's
firm
not, so you're right that it's not representative. So we
representative. Yeah,
are looking,
yeah,
so if you think of the whole scale of Indian firms, then you can have your chaiwala, which is like
yeah,
one person, two people, so small that the person cannot leave the shop because there's no
correct.
one else,
No
right?
one else.
So you can have your juice shop, your chai shop, that's just one person shops. And then you can have at the top end of the distribution something like large multinationals. You have Tata, you have
Mm.
Reliance, you have all of these, right? These have thousands of employees. They have factories all over the world.
What?
So this is the whole span of Indian firms. And mostly when, researchers study developing settings, they study India, the focus is on small firms. Now, this is also because it's costly to
It
survey larger firms.
yes, yes. So how big these firms are? Like, what is the range of the firm? Like, how many people are being employed in these firms, or maybe
Right.
in terms
So
of revenue?
our average employment is around 200, 300
300.
on average, and the median is around 800, 900 employees. So these
Okay.
are large firms. Often they're not, I mean, usually single factory, but often multi-factory,
But
I can't name the firms, but
yeah, yeah, sure.
basically we have, firms you will know, very large firms.
Great. So now, like coming back to your paper, like, can you
Hmm.
talk briefly about your working paper, The Natural Law of Management? Like,
Okay.
yeah,
So, sure. So this is basically taking work that we have done with this paper-based survey. So essentially, originally, um, we had some of the co-authors develop a phone-based survey to measure management the first time. So before that, there was no broad-scale measure of standardized measure of management. So you would have seen case studies like the one you mentioned, or you would hear anecdotal evidence, or you will see, these sort of small pieces of evidence, but it wasn't done at scale. So the first time this was done at scale was through a phone survey called the World Management Survey. Okay. And this was run for now, it's run for around 21 years. And as you can imagine, phone surveys are quite intense, also
yeah,
open-ended questions. So
yes,
I'll ask you, okay, you tell me about your tracking KPIs, and then you'll tell me, and then I'll score you. Now, this is very expensive because I need somebody who's practically an MBA to do the interview.
yes.
And
Like keep
so,
doing that. Yeah,
exactly. And so, from that, uh, the team moved to paper-based surveys, and then I was part of the first paper-based survey, which was done in the US with the US Census Bureau. And there, what we did was we converted these open-ended questions to close-ended questions. And then you essentially have firms or managers check off. So they can say how many KPIs do you measure? None, 1 to 10, more than 10,
yeah,
and so on. Right? So you have a closed-ended questionnaire. And then what you can do is you can say if somebody answers, I don't measure any KPIs, then your answer is score is 0 on that question. And if they answer many questions, track many KPIs, then the score is the highest is 1. And so every question, there were 16 questions, each one of them is between 0 and 1. And so with that, you can get a aggregated score. You average out all the questions. So you can imagine that you can take this survey, which we did in the US, and you can do it in another country. What you will need to do is you will need to do that cognitive testing like we talked about.
Yes.
And you will need to, basically, ideally do it through a statistical agency or a central bank or something. But you can say that, okay, again, I go to the manufacturing sector and all even non-manufacturing we have in the paper. And you just basically administer these questions and see what comes. So now what we have, so the US study was started in before 2012, 2013. And it was completed in 2019. It was published. So from that study, there were many follow-up studies in other countries. So there was the UK, there was, like I said, there were so many other countries where the same authors in teams together. There was Japan, there was China. All countries basically took this same questionnaire and then with very small modifications. So for example, if there's a budget constraint, then you will take those 16 questions and convert them into 12 or 8
12,
questions.
13, yes.
Exactly. So you will have a shorter survey, but basically you will get that management score. And then what we can do, so what we did in this working paper is look at what happens, like what are the common trends. So you can think natural law like a law of physics,
Yeah, I mean, it applies everywhere. It does not have to be very specific in
Exactly.
some countries. It's like,
Perfect,
yeah,
perfect. Exactly,
yeah,
Praful. So it's
yeah,
not like, oh, if it's in Japan, then it's like this, and if it's in Pakistan, it's like this. No,
that's true.
it has to be something where the same pattern is held more or less across countries.
Yeah,
So what we found was that if you look at the relationship between management and size, for example, so that's the first thing you want to look at. Then you find that the better managed firms are bigger.
bigger,
Okay.
correct.
And essentially, this is just obviously a correlation, but the idea is that if you have these practices in place, then you don't need to watch every employee. You don't need to, you can basically create a new factory and then you can run it fairly efficiently, and so on. So what we found is that the first pattern is that there's a relationship between management and size, whether you measure that size by employment or whether you measure it by sales. Okay. Then we found that there's a relationship between management and uh, profitability.
Profitable.
Okay, profitability, exporting activity. Um, what else was there? Um, Profitability, exporting activity, productivity measured by revenue per worker. Okay, so
Stability,
for
probably stability in, among the employees. Like,
So we looked at, yeah, so we looked at what we had evidence for across different countries.
across
So we couldn't look at too many variables because you
very
need the same variables in
everywhere.
all the
Yes.
14 countries. But what we found was essentially that in all of these settings, okay, going from Uruguay to Croatia, we found that your management and size and performance show that if you score higher on the management score on average, then you end up being bigger and you end up being more profitable, exporting more, being more productive. However, the translation, so this is very interesting when you think about India, that the translation is different, that relationship is more strong in countries where there are better economic environments.
Yes.
Okay. So where you can actually, for example, that if you're a better managed firm, you can grow bigger. Whereas in several countries, there are not such good economic environments. You can imagine Russia doesn't have a good one, or Pakistan doesn't have a good one. So these are where there's not a very good economic environment. And you can imagine India also might be somewhere around, in terms of economic environment, somewhere around where the emerging economies are or worse,
Yeah.
right? So in those cases, what happens is that there is a relationship between management and size, but it ends up being weaker.
Weaker.
So that was very interesting for us. Yeah.
So that's great. But yeah, we know that India is a developing country, and we talk much about the manufacturing-led growth that we are currently talking about it. And you did research on that. So if you can put a number that what's the correlation between the India's growth rate, if possible, and the improved management I know it's difficult, but
I'm
some light
working
of
on it. I was actually working on it today. So
okay.
yeah, I mean, the reason I don't want to, I'm hesitant to give a number is that our sample is of large firms.
Yes,
Okay, now
correct.
again, you could have a management size relation even there. But I'm still working on it. We are still collecting data. So right now we have 1,400 observations. But yesterday we got 1,800 observations. So those have to be cleaned up and read in. So once that is done, I'm going to rerun everything and then I'm going to get back to you.
Yeah,
But
but still,
it's still in progress.
but I know it's still in progress,
So
and
the
of course,
relationship between management and size is not like it would be in Denmark or the USA.
yeah, of course, you
It,
can give me the range. Like, it's not like you
yeah.
say 0.6% or 0.7
No,
0.7.
essentially there are what ends up happening is that you end up with three different groups. One is the sort of non places where market economies aren't functional,
Functioning well. I
aren't
mean, not
functional.
well,
And the
yeah.
second is which are like kind of emerging economies where you have some sort of market economy working. And the third are where they're very well functioning market economies. And India kind of falls within the emerging, sometimes in the non-functional range. So I would say that you can't really talk about it till you have the
Till you
number.
have the number. I
Yeah,
mean, I'll wait for this number to for
we can do another call where we only
yeah.
discuss one
No,
number.
for my thumbnail, I'll wait for the number so that I can write on my thumbnail. But anyway,
Okay.
so coming back to this, and I think from your answer, it's quite obvious that the relationship is not very great. So, like, if you can talk about what the challenges,
We
like,
don't expect.
yeah,
So
like
we don't expect that relationship to be great because of the
great
frictions that we already know are there in India
in
in
India,
terms of
yes.
hiring, firing, and everything.
Yeah, so is it also a problem of a mindset or a capital requirement? Because I have also worked in startup and a different company. I have worked for companies in India, so even they have a
What
capital
companies have you worked? Let your audience also know.
that the people can go and see on my LinkedIn. So
Okay,
I
okay,
would
fine.
refrain
Okay.
from.
So what was
Uh,
your experience?
uh, I mean, so I have worked in a big firm also, where
Hmm.
like big four, not EY
Yeah.
and PW, so a different field, big four.
Okay,
So
fine.
okay, so I mean, overall culture and management practices is good, but I don't know, I cannot say in terms of what was the result, but yes, in terms of startup in small firms I worked there, I can say that they really don't want to invest much money on training and telling
Yeah.
what exactly the
Yeah.
management practices should be. It's not that they don't know, everyone knows that, like how we treat the employee and everything. But yes, I mean, but there's also one thing, like I total experience is my 6.5 years. So 2 3 years back I was just an analyst and a kid, so I really didn't care much about the management practices, how they are treating. It's just that you have to work, and also uh, I don't have much to say on that thing. uh,
Yeah, so you're absolutely right that essentially startups might be working on a tight budget,
yes,
or often you find that when the VCs take over, then the VCs implement better management. So they'll
yes,
say, sort of say that we should have regular meetings, give us reports in this particular
yes,
format. So till that stage happens, you're also a very small firm. So if
yes.
you're a small firm, you might not even need those practices in place because you can actually literally see what every employee is doing. So you don't need to have this. So startups is a very small fraction of startups like the startups you're talking about, not just
but
any
but
small
uh,
business.
but luckily I worked in a good startup. It's almost $1 billion valuation right now, that startup. uh, but there's also one problem is that most of the businesses are family run business. Even they are very big, they are family run businesses. And
Yeah,
personally I felt that whenever there's a family run businesses, the head of that family doesn't understand the management practices, because the person has not seen in his or her life, like how important the management practice. Because India, like we don't much value employee and people. So that is one of the friction which I see the previous generation managing the businesses today. Maybe future
yeah.
things will
Yeah,
change.
so most exactly. So, yeah, that's what I was saying. So the startups would be a very small fraction of India's firm population. Most would be medium and large also
Yes.
businesses, which are family owned, family run, and so on. They actually care a lot about their employees, to the extent that they care maybe too much about their employees. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So
but
it is
these are very small companies, to be honest.
the small, also the very large. So even if you look at very large companies, basically, the idea is that, especially the larger companies, which are slightly older, they were practically run like, public firms. So in the sense that once you join that job, you kind of have tenure throughout your career in that job, and you will retire with some kind of pension. Okay. So often in those companies, you might have that the employees are treated like family, or
Family.
there's the sense that you are part of
Sense
something,
of
and you will not.
belongings comes. Sense of belongingness come
Exactly.
over a
And that
period
you
of time.
won't
Yeah.
be fired just because you underperform. You might be moved, but you won't be fired. Um, that's one thing. And in the family run businesses, obviously there's a conflict, because you might want to make decisions that may be good for the owner
Owner.
relative to if you had shareholders, right? So if you don't have any, if you're the majority shareholder, you're making the decisions, you might make them like, in terms of who you give contracts to, or who you put in charge of different businesses, or for family firms, uh, there's a conflict between what the owner might want and what is best for the firm.
Mm.
And even if you are not a second generation family firm, you can imagine that people go into business because they want to do what they want to do, right? They want flexible work hours, they want power, they want to give jobs to, and contracts to their friends and family. So essentially, there is a huge, conflict that is well known in the corporate governance
Sure.
literature on family ownership. Um, and the other thing which is common that we found when you're running, in the management research in India, is that you find that you don't trust people outside the family because your codes don't work. So
Work.
you will not. So if you want to start a new, arm of the business in, say, you are operating out of North India and now you want to open something
South
in
India, yeah.
South India. You
Mm.
will only put somebody you trust there. Typically, that person is your brother or your son or your nephew or somebody in the family. So you will not put an outsider there, because if they run away with the money, it will take like, 20, 50 years with the Indian court system to be able to recover that loss.
Yes.
Not easy. And this is, I'm sure you've heard many stories. I've heard many
Yeah.
stories where people have run away with money, in the business sense also. And so essentially, what some of the studies have found. So, for example, some of the stuff that Nick did, he found that the size of the business, so the number of size in terms of how many factories you have, or how many locations you have, how many employees you have, it depends on how many male members there are
They
in the.
have the family have, yes, that matters a
Yeah, because
lot.
essentially law enforcement and courts are so weak that there's a trust issue. The other thing that came out for India, which I'm sure you will understand, is that firms have never seen the entire range of productivity. So they will say, yeah, this is the best, right? We are the best in
We
our
are there.
sector.
Yeah.
What's
I
the
mean,
problem?
overall, Indian have not seen what productivity look like. Even today, like even the
Yeah,
big firms. I mean, if you see the big firm CEOs and founder, they only say that our productivity is very leafy compared to like China, or
yeah.
like even the small country. Like we have not reached to the level to understand the productivity actually.
Yeah, and the problem is not like we are not putting in labor. Like
Like
everybody works long hours. It's
long
not
hours a
that
day.
it's a question of labor.
Efficiency. It's
It's
efficiency.
productivity. It is
Yeah.
literally productivity, and essentially you have no idea. You've never done it. So, I mean, I can anticipate that maybe your next question is that if you know all of these things work,
Yes. How?
then why would you not implement them, right?
Yes. So, like, is it like something related to policy? If the effective policy to be changed, then it might get implemented or something like that, or like it can be done at government level, or only it is possible on the private level of the company. How do you think, according to you?
So, what we've understood in the broad literature, not only on management, but on any organizational input, is that when you change one thing in the business, you change many, many things in the business. Okay. So suppose I decided to change, my hiring policy, my hiring, firing, promotion policy. Then what will happen is I'll get a different set of employees. Now, these might be younger people who are okay to get fired, blah, blah, blah. So they might come with a different skill set or a different vintage. They might be able to work with different capital. So what happens is the minute you change one thing inside an organization, everything has to be like
In a
refixed.
same standard or in a same impact, the ripple
It
effect,
has to be that you change this, and then everything has to be readjusted to be complementary to that
complement. Yes.
input. So it's the same with management. So if you think of management as an input into production, okay, imagine you're in a family firm and one day some hotshot MBA comes, okay, that person says, now we run things differently, now we do XYZ, everybody will go mental. Okay. So
Yes, yes.
they will not be okay like on day one, adjusting
Changing
fully. They will
everything.
never
Yes.
be. And it's not that people will be cribbing and crying, but it's that they're fundamentally everything does need to be reorganized around the new input.
Input.
It's with anything, right? So that is what there is at the firm level. And then what you think of it in terms of government policies and so on. Essentially, there are different things. Fundamentally, skill. So if you want to implement, management practices in firms, then you need, skilled employees who are able to work with that. So that's an input which is complementary. So in terms of education, India has a lot of work to do on that. The other thing is exposure. So if you basically keep if you don't let multinationals in, and if you make sure that you're very protective of Indian industry, so then what happens is that firms never get to see what is the frontier of performance, productivity
Yes.
management, innovation. Okay, so uh, if you think, like, for example, large plants, when they want to come in and set up local production in India, what happens is that Indian employees are going there and working, and those employees are going to go somewhere else and work, right? And they're going to, sort of take those practices with them. So that's how other firms who are either connected through the supply chain or through employees moving, or even by looking at, okay, what is this firm doing? You look at your
Yeah.
competitors.
Yes.
So if it's an under competitive market, then you're not going to get, advancement, basically. So those are two dimensions in terms of policy where, why Indian firms think that we are the best, we are at the frontier, nothing can happen. So.
Yeah, I think competition will play a very important role. That's another thing. Like, the more competition, the firm will come and think why they are doing good, why they are not doing good, and probably it will play an important role for improve their management actually.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I
I
think,
mean, too much,
yeah,
yeah, too much competition is also hard, because in some sense that India has, uh,
already
you
a
know,
lot of
we're,
competition.
we're a democracy. We have labor laws. We have, human rights. We can't be competing with countries which don't
No,
in
no, I'm
production.
talking about the in India only. Like one company compete with other country in that productivity or sales. I mean, it will reflected in sales, not that productivity will be measured in that way, but in the sales.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or you will see, so, when you see what happens normally in the market with anything,
yeah.
when one new product is introduced, then the competitors look and say, okay,
Oh,
people are buying that. In your consumer surveys, you find out that, people prefer that product. Why do they prefer it? And then you try to like innovate, basically, to be able to capture some of that market.
got it. I think great. I mean, yeah, time will come that India will understand the productivity and it. I mean, founders, especially the startup founders, are making the word productivity very, very important. They are talking on all the important forums. I remember, like in Shark Tank India, Piyush Goyal
Yeah.
and all, they talk about how productivity has changed their company and their overall
Yeah.
environment. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah, I mean, India, like in terms of innovation, it's very interesting, because what you find is that most of the innovations, so if you think about it, if you think of Uber, Ola, these
yeah.
are not, Ola is not innovative in the sense it's taken a business model that was
um,
innovative in the
yeah.
West and just essentially adapted it to a large consumer market,
Yes.
right? So that
Yes.
itself was not particularly innovative. Or, for example, Flipkart, it basically, if you think of Amazon versus
What?
Flipkart, Flipkart's innovation was cash on delivery.
Cash on
Okay,
delivery.
so that was the single innovation that people don't have cards. They prefer to pay when they get the product. So, but that's a very small innovation. That's not like massively innovative, but
I
it gave them a huge market share.
Yeah, but I
So,
don't think so. It's an innovation. It's a requirement for the country. India is not like it when
exactly.
it started
But if
in
you,
2008, like now also the card penetration is very low in India.
yeah.
So the cash on deliveries,
So
we say it's a requirement. It's not
you
innovation.
call it a requirement, but
Yeah.
Amazon was not doing it for many years. Amazon was in India not doing it, and people were not doing online delivery. Still, cash on delivery came in, right?
Oh, yeah. If we see on that sense, I mean,
Yeah, I call it an innovation. So if you think innovation is only what gets patented, what gets, R&D funding, that's a very limited
the way of
share of the
understanding
innovation
innovation.
that happens in India.
Yeah.
Most innovation is happening when you produce like small packets at low cost. If you think that you have your large biscuit packet and then you have a small biscuit packet, and what you do is you try to keep that small biscuit packet at 5 rupees.
5 rupees.
Okay, how do you keep it at 5 rupees? Because people will not buy it at 6 and they will not buy it at 4.
So
So you have
they
to
will
keep it at 5.
decrease the
So
quantity of it and nobody understand.
so
Like if
either
you
they
see
take out one. So
Oreo and
exactly. So you
Maggie.
can
Yeah.
you can take out one biscuit.
Yeah.
You can make each biscuit thinner. You
Thinner
can reduce the plastic. So earlier, what used to happen, if you remember some of the biscuits, they used to have like this thing where each Jim Jam was in
will
one.
have in a plastic. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
So now
double
suppose
cover.
that now suppose you have to cut costs. So what you're going to do is you're going to take that plastic thing out of the thing, but then you don't want the biscuit to be crushed. So you need some more stable packaging material for the cover. So this
Cover.
is an innovation.
Correct.
Okay.
It's a
So
jugaad. Like there's a book
these
also,
are
Jugaad versus
innovations. So I have understood that even if you don't patent, even this is essentially continuous improvement happening inside the firm.
Kaizen.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, these
Kaizen.
are innovations, and there are process innovations. So, so in chemical processes, you might think that, especially for example, now, with basically prices going up, you might need to say that, okay, now how do we raise the heat, for the chemical process to this level without using coal?
Coal.
Right. So now to be able to do that, you still want to produce the same output, but like for example, an aluminum smelter needs a certain temperature, which can only be done with coal.
Coal.
Okay. But you can imagine that some other, process, you can think that, okay, let's think of an innovation, which is a process innovation. So these are happening inside firms continuously in India. These are not captured as a patent
Pattern.
always. So large firms might patent them, but once you patent them, then your competitors know about that
No
technology.
word is yes.
So sometimes you just put it in the production process, and the impact of that is that your cost is low,
Cost is low.
right? So it is an innovation. I have, yeah. So I mean, I have learned over time that these, if you look out for innovations, every time the packaging changes, every time so for example, in India, the tea. So if you take, for example, Lipton tea, okay, Lipton tea has a different taste in North India, East India, West India, South India.
Based on their geographic location, they change
Yeah,
their
so
taste.
it's still like a box
Same
of tea.
packaging.
It
Yeah.
looks it looks the same
Yeah.
from outside. But if
Yes.
you go to a shop in Calcutta and you make a cup of tea, it's gonna taste different than if you do it in Delhi.
Yeah.
And this is just because the local manager, the like regional manager, is aware that people have different preferences, and then they are doing these small innovations.
Yeah. So got it. So I mean, it's a huge topic and it's interesting topic, which actually leads to productivity. So one last question, like overall, like in India, like what do you think the current Indian economic situation in terms of future growth? I know we will talk much about the positive aspect that is happening in last 10 to 15 years, but I would also like you to shed on the things which is not happening, like the healthcare, education, which is very important. Like, so what do you think on that?
Okay, so in terms of the positive, basically, I think that the term used is 3D demography. Uh, what was it? Demography, digitization, and uh,
Okay. Oh,
democracy.
Oh, I don't.
Democracy,
I
demography,
don't.
and digitization. Okay,
Yes.
so this is the positive. This is why we are very optimistic about India. We have a huge demographic advantage.
Yes.
Of course, it depends on skilling the labor, but we have, basically, essentially, we have labor force. And in terms of digitization, everybody can be part of the growth story of India.
Yes.
And in terms of democracy, essentially, we're going to have a healthy, sustainable way of growing. On the negatives, of course, there's a lot of work to be done, like you said, on the basics.
Yeah.
So, for example, we did this survey in Karnataka, and it was done with Jeff Hammer, who worked at the World Bank for many years and was also teaching at Princeton. So, some of the questions we've included in this household survey, you wouldn't think, but we were trying to measure absolute extreme poverty. So
Poverty.
not just, whether you have a pakka house, kacha house, a pakka floor, kacha floor, and all of that, but also, do you ever go to sleep hungry? And 85% of people said that once a month at least. So they said at least once a month, do you go to sleep hungry? 85% of people said yes, they go to sleep
In
hungry.
that particular region,
Yeah, so this was rural Karnataka.
rural Karnataka.
This was villages. And then we had a question which was, do you have your own pair of shoes? And, we had another question which was, do you have your separate bed to sleep on or not? And most people like answered no.
No.
So these are like very, very basic things that were missing, right? That there's still, high infant mortality, high maternal mortality,
Yeah.
very poor primary education. Basically kids are in eighth class, but they're doing maths, which is like second class
Second class. Yeah.
mathematics. So these are, big, big problems. These are big problems.
Yeah. I
And these
think.
take a very long period of time.
Yeah. I mean, even after so many years, we are still struggling with the basics. That's what keeping us
Yeah.
from the extreme growth. We are still not reached to a double-digit growth, and these are the things will only place India on the double-digit growth, I think.
Yeah, so essentially you can't, for example, you need you need skilled people, and you need basic skill, and you need people to participate in that. And from a firm's perspective, you need infrastructure. So whether it's roads, bridges, digital infrastructure, you need connectivity and so on.
Connectivity.
You need the court systems to work, right? So if you want to have these modern practices, if you want to have outside managers, if you want firms to be more diversified, then you need court systems to work,
To work.
right? So otherwise, you basically can't do debt recovery. In terms of financing, it's very difficult, right? So India still has collateral-based lending. So if you don't, have like a physical property that you say, this is mine and this is what I'm using to get a loan, you can't get a business loan as
Yes.
and obviously you can in high tech and, VC private equity. But if you're a regular small business, you don't get a business loan.
Even the education loan, I have faced this problem while I was
Mhm.
applying for business loan. It's sorry,
Yeah,
education loan. It's very difficult. I mean, there are some firms which has very high interest, but if
yeah,
you go to like private banks and even the government bank, it's very difficult to get a
yeah,
education loan
yeah,
without any
yeah,
collateral, and everybody does
yeah.
not have. But
And
yeah,
there's several businesses which are not collateral based at all.
yeah, they are
So,
service based. Like they don't have machine, they don't have
exactly.
infrastructure. Yes, they are services based.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a very good discussion, and this can go on and on. So we have to stop somewhere. So thank you so much, Professor Megha, for joining. Thank you so much for listening my podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.